Hello, and welcome to EPR with your favorite environmental nerds, Nic and Laura. On today's episode, Nic and I discuss military conservation. We are joined by Tom Ries, Vice President and ecologist at ESA, to talk about Living Shorelines, his unique scholarship, and a really scary rattlesnake encounter. Ugh. So it's a really great listen. Stay tuned. And finally, we all know that birds have hollow bones that allow them to fly. But surprisingly, this doesn't make them lighter than ours because they are so dense. Which is interesting. I always thought they were.
Yeah, me too.
Chickadees.
Right.
They're just smaller, I guess.
Yeah, just smaller.
Instead, they provide a better mechanism for delivering oxygen to the muscles birds use to fly. Huh, who knew?
Yeah, kind of cool.
Please be sure to subscribe, rate, and review. Hit that music.
Okay, before we get started today, don't forget to join NAEP leadership for an Ask Us Anything happy hour on Wednesday, October 13th, 2021. Don't know why I said the year. At 4:30 p.m. Pacific time, 7:30 p.m. Eastern. NAEP hosts these every month, and you can find more details at www.naep.org. They're always a good time, so please do come out and really ask us anything. So that's awesome. And
especially
I trail
youngsters.
Yeah, for sure. Laura and I love doing the show. If you love it too and would like us to keep doing it, we need your help. We can't do it without our awesome sponsors. So please head over to www.environmentalprofessionalsradio.com and check out our sponsor form for details. Let's get to our segment. We talked to Tom yesterday, and so I thought it'd be really fun for us to talk a little bit about conservation efforts that happen at military installations, because it seems counterintuitive, right? Like where you're you're doing conservation on a military installation. There's just so much space. And, we talked about MacDill, but MacDill has a really great environmental endangered species program. And it's really cool that they've taken that effort on. And instead of, balking at the idea of having to deal with it, they're like, no, let's actually do some real conservation. But yeah, those are great efforts at MacDill. And there's great efforts at Eglin for sure. I know Eglin actually has the largest red-cockaded woodpecker population.
What kind of what?
red cockaded woodpecker. We always call them RCWs because it's way easier to say. And yeah, so they have this huge land. So RCWs they're really cool birds because they're basically keystone species. They're the only ones that can drill out holes in pine trees and the pine trees in the area. And so if they don't do that, then other birds and other animals can't use those. That land is going to be preserved forever. And so because of that, the RCWs are like, sweet, thanks, And they've even worked with universities there to do studies on the birds, which is really cool.
Yeah, I think Eglin has won awards for their environmental management programs.
Yeah, I think you're right. So we're talking RCWs, we're talking about military conservation in general, but Laura, you've done work at MacDill, right? Like with their conservation program?
Yeah. So we used to do, I was in charge of our pollution prevention grants, and MacDill would often apply, or Tom Ries would apply for grants that work out there. So, yeah. And we also were part of the annual seagrass monitoring efforts. And so we were always fighting over who would get to do the transects out at MacDill.
Right. Yeah.
They are some of the most lush, but they're also some of the deepest. So you got to hit the tide just right on those. But yeah, we did projects from seagrass projects to reef balls and oyster domes out there, which are really cool. And it's a great spot. It's so pretty, and be able to go out there in the private space. And I think you can see, Tampa Bay from that point, and you can see all the shoreline across the bay around from there and everything. It's fantastic.
Actually, before you go on, like when you say that you have to plan for tides, like you mean if you go out at the wrong time, your day is ruined? Like you have to do it the right way?
So, when you're doing the seagrass transects, you're starting from your starting line and you have a set marker point to follow, so that you're basically doing a set of data to compare to the years previous to see if the seagrass is becoming more dense or if it's going out further than it used to or receding. And then that's all compiled for the whole bay to say, it's part of the health of the bay sort of matrix that they have, but the seagrass is one of the key indicators. Yeah. And so the tide can change very quickly. So you could be, you start at a low tide. If your transect is very long, which it's going to be at MacDill, it's basically going to go. So it depends on, how fast it gets deep and because it's so nice out there, that transect can go out pretty far. And so by the time you get out there, if the tide is rising, you're at the point where, someone is swimming to get to the bottom to do the collection of data. And then there's a whole logistics of taking the boat along with you. And
right.
And then you're even getting so far out that you're like, okay, are there sharks out here? Like, what are we getting into? So tide is a big part of planning your seagrass monitoring efforts. But there's some really cool work out there. But, we don't really talk to Kara too much on here, but Kara's always here keeping track of this stuff for us. But she's a military wife and has had a lot of experience at different bases. And I know that she's got something she can share with us. So,
yeah, my husband was stationed on Camp Pendleton, which is a base in Southern California. It's situated between San Diego and LA. And it's a beautiful base, and it's right along the shoreline. I think there's like 17 miles of shoreline. And little known fact, it has, I believe it's about 19 endangered species now.
Wow.
And there were arroyo toad, the California least tern, but there's the one that's most endangered is the Pacific pocket mouse. And there's only I think there's only about 100 left, and they're only found in 4 places in the world, and 3 of which are on base. And so the base makes huge efforts to move training positions and, and help these species out and help them survive, especially since so much of surrounding areas are being more populated. It's driving more of these species on the base. So because it's really one of the last remaining open wild parts of Southern California.
Yeah.
So it's pretty cool.
Gosh,
awesome.
especially there between LA and San Diego, because like you think of it, it's kind of all paved except for Camp Pendleton. That's awesome. Did you travel to any other bases with any other conservation?
We were on that base for about 10 years, so that was our primary spot. I mean, so that was the base
nice.
that, there are worse places to be.
Right. Yeah, no, there really are. Trust me.
It was beautiful. On a clear day, we could see the Catalina, so that was lovely. But I remember flying back home the one time to the East Coast, and behind me sat 2 businessmen, and they were talking about what a waste Camp Pendleton was, because it had so much undeveloped land, prime real estate, and it made me so mad.
I know. But, and we're all coming from different perspectives. It's but anyway.
Well, thanks, Kara.
Yeah.
Sure.
But it's really neat. I love that there's programs all over the country like that too, and there's the requirements that military has to abide by, and all federal agencies really have to abide by. But it's nice to see too that sometimes it's above and beyond. Sometimes it's more than just checking a box, which is really cool.
Yeah, so we need more of that.
Yeah.
Kara leveled, everybody. Woo!
Yeah. Woo, we did it. Yay.
Thank you.
All right, let's get to our interview.
Cool.
All right, welcome back to EPR. Today we have Tom Ries. He's Vice President and Ecologist with Environmental Science Associates, ESA, on the show. Welcome, Tom.
Thank you, Laura. And I want to thank you and Nic and your staff and the National Association of Environmental Professionals, because this is a great venue to talk about technical items. So thank you.
That's awesome. So Nic, as I was telling you, Tom is one of my favorite people. He's super awesome to work with. Such a nice guy. And so, Tom, how about you tell the people listening a little bit about what you do? Okay.
I'm a marine biologist some days, an ecologist, a biologist. It depends what we work on. But 35 years of experience doing this type of work. Very fortunate in my career to right away get into projects where we would do restoration, ecosystem habitat restoration. And it morphed over the years. Worked a lot in aquatics doing seagrass. And then over the years, it became more estuarine. And now in the last few years, we've really been doing a lot of nature-based shorelines or living shorelines. And so that's what I've been doing a lot of. And it's an important topic, right, with sea level rise.
Yeah, absolutely. So Nic, Tom and I have been working together for over a decade, probably.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
We worked on some really cool projects. So I get to see firsthand the care and the type of projects that Tom does, including like restoring hidden wetlands. Eulalie Springs in the Tampa area is a magical place with a nice restaurant. And a lot of that is just from Tom digging that up, literally.
Cool.
And we did some salt marsh restoration, and I really enjoyed that work that we did together, all in Florida.
So yeah, that's cool. That is really cool. I didn't know you guys had like that kind of connection point. So I don't know, Tom, did you grow up in Florida? Was there like a love? When did your love of outdoors start?
Well, it started when I was a kid watching Jacques Cousteau.
Yeah.
I used to watch that show, and I was so hooked on that even though my aptitude test said I should be an engineer, I was going to override that and be a biologist. So I grew up in D.C., and I got a scholarship to come down here for all crazy items for water skiing. I used to do a lot of water skiing, and I got pretty good at it. So I got a scholarship to go to water ski. It's kind of unusual. So I said, I'm going to Florida.
Yeah.
And I have to say, when I got here, the climate and the beauty and the area, from the corals to the springs, the areas in Florida is very unique, and I never left.
Wait, so where were you water skiing in DC? Where were you practicing before you came down here?
Well, we actually live real close to the Potomac River. And so my parents were big avid boaters, and they started a boat club. My dad was Commodore. And so they would always have these events, and then they started getting into competitions. So I would win all of them, mostly because I was the oldest kid in the group.
Right.
But all those awards got me a scholarship to university down here. And so that's how it started.
I love that.
That's really cool. Awesome. Can you still get a water skiing scholarship? Does that happen?
I think so. UT still does it. And I'm sure there's other schools. I was so shocked. I'm like, all right, this is some kind of sign. I can get paid to water ski. I'm coming there, wherever it is.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Wow. So there you go. That is a new thing. I think everyone is learning. You can get a water skiing scholarship. That's awesome.
It is. So now at this point, though, I would consider you one of the foremost experts in living shorelines. And why don't we talk about that a little bit for the listeners? So what are living shorelines and why are they important?
No, that's a great question. Obviously, shorelines, we think of living shorelines or a natural shoreline being fine, and they are. They're not altered. Most of them are fine, but over time, these shorelines or a shoreline could have erosion because all of a sudden there's ship wakes or boat wakes or something has changed. And so that natural shoreline is eroding. And so that's been happening for a long time as population moves closer to the coast, right? And more of us. So the engineers get involved and they have a good solution. And most of it's a hardened solution. They'll put a seawall up. That takes care of your property line. There's no question you're not going to get erosion anymore. And that's good from that one point of view. It stabilizes that line. But unfortunately, it has a lot of negatives with it because it takes out the most important portion of the shoreline, which is the intersection between deep water and upland.
Yeah.
That's where all the fish, that's where all the birds, that's where everything's happening. And so you lose that immediately when you put a vertical structure in. So that was done through, people didn't realize that. And now we're starting to realize the negatives are outweighing the one positive of having a hard line there. And so we're finding out a lot of seawalls were put up where they should have never been put up. They just continued them away from an area where they needed a seawall into the cove where they don't need one. And so we are doing projects where we take the seawall out because there was no need for it. And we want to get the ecosystem services back that we lost by having a vertical structure.
Yeah. So what are those structures that are lost and how are you taking that out without doing any, environmental damage really?
Right. And so taking a seawall out is not our normal thing. Out of all the seawall or living shoreline projects, that's only a small fraction. But the ones that were put where there never should have been one in the first place, we take them out because there's no energy. There was never a need to have one. Somebody just put it in just because they thought that's what everybody else is doing, or they were trying to put more houses in the subdivision. So we take them out completely and put in a gradual sloped shoreline. And if it's truly a quiescent area, that's all you need to do. Just plant it, and it's back to what it was before the seawall was ever there. So now you have your ecosystems. A lot of areas, we can't take seawalls out because you're right 10 feet away from a building and infrastructure, and there's just no room to peel back the bank to get that normal, gradual 6-to-1 slope back. So in those cases, we do seawall enhancement projects. Those are not living shorelines. They don't provide that resiliency to accommodate sea level rise, but they do provide ecological benefits because now you're putting things in front of the seawall that you can plant in. And so now you have a living structure in front of the seawall. So it's not a living shoreline, but it does provide ecosystem services for now. And so we do both. We do more of the latter, seawall enhancements right now, but we're going to do and trying to do more seawall removals. We just got to get people comfortable with that thought. People are like nervous that if you take it out, the good news is, and I don't want to go straight into without another question, but I will say that the good news is there's been a lot of research showing two properties right next to each other. One put a living shoreline in, one kept their seawall, and they had direct hit by a hurricane, and the seawall was completely obliterated. In the living shoreline, we have photos of these sites, can't even tell anything happened. And so that's worth its weight in gold to show these images because people are just leery of this, and they really think that seawall is protecting them, and it really isn't because the biggest enemy to seawall is the water that sits right next to it.
Yeah, and that's brilliant because that's that leads right into my next question because, I live in North Carolina, right? And our coastline is very fluid. And I would say, we had direct storms a couple of years ago that blow out these exact things, just exactly what you're talking about. So how is it able to actually keep the shore from being damaged during a big storm like that?
Right. I mean, all shorelines are vulnerable for a Cat 5. Okay. If you have something like that, that's nothing you can protect from. But our living shorelines, we design them for a Cat 2 hurricane. Okay. And so what happens in the processes, if you had a seawall there and you have a Cat 2, big storm, you get water over the seawall. And like I said, it's the enemy of a seawall. And if it's not well drained, it's going to take the seawall out on its way out. All that water goes over it, and now it's impacted behind it. And if the wall can't handle that, it'll completely fail. And it doesn't necessarily happen with one storm, but multiple small storms will eventually take a wall down. And so that's, if you have a natural shoreline, a 6-to-1 slope, 8-to-1 slope, all that water can go up in there. This is not providing resiliency from tidal surge, but when it leaves, the wall is not there. So it has a natural slope right back down. It just flows down. It doesn't hurt anything. And that's why you can't tell a storm even went through because the vegetation most of the time can hold that. If it's really bad, well, you may have to replace your vegetation, but it can handle that kind of surge. These systems do work really well. And it's just getting the population to understand that they are like that.
Yeah. And so, that does seem to be a big challenge because it seems like it's something that when you hear you talk about it, everyone should be like, okay, let's all do living shoreline. So what are the actual challenges for getting that put in place? Is it expensive? Is that the challenge or something else?
Actually, it's cheaper than replacing your seawall, or definitely cheaper than putting your first seawall in the first place.
Yeah.
And so that's how we sell it. Okay, that's the things to the person that owns the land that's most important. If you do surveys on people with shorelines, the number one thing is they want to protect their shore. Number two is how much does it cost to protect their shore?
Right.
These ancillary benefits of ecological, aesthetics improvements, maybe land value improvements, that's not something that they have their thumb on. They're really worried about cost and effectiveness, right? So what we're learning is that these living shorelines cost less to put in. You never have to replace them. Even if it costs the same as the seawall in 30 years from now or 35 years from now, you're going to be replacing it, or somebody will be. And so they cost less. They have all the ecological benefits that we want as ecologists, and they improve aesthetics for an area. So in some states like Maryland and cities in Virginia like Norfolk, you can't put a seawall in. You have to start with something softer. Mm-hmm. And they have actually measured the water quality benefits of having 100 feet of natural shoreline versus a seawall. And that is counted as credits. And these people are being incentivized to do this. So to answer your question, the biggest impediment of all of this is teaching people to understand that. And even bigger than that is permitting. Permitting has not been set up for living shorelines. So up to 4 years ago, for example, if I wanted to put a living shoreline in, or I'm trying to talk somebody into doing it, that's 6 to 9 months of permitting, where in this state, you're just replacing a seawall, it's automatic, just go do it. So it's a major disincentive to try and do a living shoreline. Now, we worked on this very hard about 6 years ago, a group of us, folks from North Carolina and other parts of the country, trying to get the Corps to change their rules, because every 5 years they have their nationwide renewals.
Yeah.
So 4 years ago, they came up with the nationwide 54, specifically written for nature-based or living shorelines. And we have been using them. And the state here is trying to mimic them, but it's still not completely the same. The problem is the local municipalities and the counties are not there. So even if I had the federal and state permit, I still have to deal with the local permit in some counties here. And so again, we're in that same boat. Well, I'm not going to wait 6 months and pay tens of thousands of dollars, because you have to have a professional engineer. You need to have a coastal engineer. You got to pull plans, and that costs money. So it's still right now a major disincentive to do this. And that's a problem. That's something we need to work on nationally, because even if all the public entities did all their public lands with living shorelines, that's only 20%, right? The other 80% is privately owned. We really need to have the public as part of the solution. And so incentivizing it there's a lot of ways you can do it. First of all, make it easier to permit, and then actually incentivize somebody to do it. Then you are going to really get some traction, I think, to get the private landowners to do this.
Now, that's a lot of really awesome information. And I mean, we were seeing that 15 years ago and trying when I was working at EPC, and the big challenge was this is restoration, and it had more red tape balled up around it than, someone trying to do something in their backyard and pave something over.
Yeah.
So we got to make those changes. And so hopefully we can get some more people on the show and people listening who will get on board and help out with that. Tom, you have at any time, I know, many, many projects going at once, both with your day job at ESA and your work at Ecosphere Restoration. So what do you got going on right now, and what's kind of your most exciting thing?
Well, I'll start with the living shorelines. We have been very successful lately to get a lot of projects for public entities to put living shorelines in. Right now, I'm working on 12 projects. 10 of them were underway. 2 more are coming, all at the same time.
Wow.
And that's luckily because there's funding, right? There's state funding for it. There's federal funding, and hopefully more with this infrastructure funding coming down from the feds. And so they're jumping on the bandwagon. They're the ones that have to use our taxpayer money to repair that public seawall. And we're saving them a lot of money by not doing it. We're working with one municipality, Treasure Island, and they have almost 3,000 linear feet of shoreline. That's all hardened. And we're going to take out over half of it and make it a living shoreline. And the other half we're going to do, because it's facing the intercoastal waterway, we're going to have to do a seawall enhancement. But it's saving them and our taxpayers a lot of dollars. And so those are exciting projects to work on. On the Ecosphere side, we have a number of projects working on doing, Black Rail was just listed this few months ago by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. And so we're trying to do some restoration for that kind of habitat for black rails. And so I'm lucky to be able to work on that at MacDill Air Force Base. So there's a number of projects going on all at once, all good, right? They're all good projects. So that's why we endure doing them all at one time, I guess.
Yeah, that's fun though. It's great to have lots of different things going on at the same time. And I don't know why that reminded me of something. We're talking about seawalls, and I actually have a seawall mishap for you. So I kind of want to see if there's any others like this. There's a park they built in San Diego where they put up a seawall, and they did that so that the shoreline could be used for kids. Like, there's no, the undertow's not there. It's just a pre-beach to use. But what ended up happening was all of the, I think it's elephant seals or fur seals, one of the two. They're like, oh, great, a beach with no waves. Let's go hang out there, right? So it just became this seal sanctuary, right? So it totally did the opposite of what it was supposed to do. No one can use it. Do you have any other like fun stories about that kind of thing where there's maybe like if somebody thought the seawall would be a great idea, but ended up not being one?
I'm not sure about where they thought that would be a good idea. And most of the folks that put them in, these are all been put in 40 years ago, or that time frame, where there was a lot of rampant development before there were regulations, where they were literally filling the bay and making these artificial uplands so they could have all this waterfront property. And so that's really had some detrimental impacts in the long run because, first of all, we lost all that seagrass acreage, but it changed the circulation pattern. Every wave that hits the seawall, it has one or two options. It goes up or down, and it does both, right? And the part that goes down, it resuspends the sediments on the bottom and can ultimately cause enough scour that you can weaken your base for your seawall. And so a lot of seawalls are failing because of that. The water quality is less now because every wave is resuspending sediments. And if you just put rock at the bottom of the toe, that would be an improvement.
Right.
And so some people have been putting riprap in front of seawalls, and that's a good thing to do. It extends the life of your seawall. And so what we've been doing is taking the rock and putting sediment bags in it right at the intertidal zone, and then planting stuff. Here we can do mangroves, but you could do marshes.
Yeah.
And so now you have plants growing as part of your seawall structure. And so I think people are starting to realize that because of all the negatives that's going on, that they have to either replace that seawall or they would like to improve water quality. These are things you can do in conjunction with whatever replacement and or enhancement to a seawall. And so I didn't really answer your question too much. I will say that, okay, so if we're going to have to all replace our seawalls here because they're all about coming of age, well, you can't have one county saying, we'll let you do that through our permitting and you can go as high as you want or as low as you want. We need a uniform thing, right?
Yeah.
So we're working with the regional agency here in about 6 different counties all at once, coming up with a uniform seawall height, right? What is that? And what is that? What horizon you're looking at? 2060, because that's when the seawalls would have to be again replaced, or 2070. And where's sea level rise going to be there? And so we're working to come up with not only a uniform height, but if you are replacing your seawall because there's no other way to do it, then you need to do these seawall enhancement components. So we're trying to get these local codes changed and try and figure out a creative way to make it an incentive, either because of the water quality improvements. And if you were a city and you have an impaired water and the state's requiring you to improve water quality, well, you only can do so much because you only have so much control. But if you got a whole mess of people, 100 people to put a living seawall in or take their seawall out, you can count that water quality credits towards the same thing. So maybe you lower their taxes, or if there's a permit, you waive the permit fee, or make it so that if it's such a standard thing and there's no natural impacts, you don't need a permit. So that would then
There's a crazy
improve
idea.
water quality for their, right. Multiple entities at once. So that's something I think that's kind of going on here that I think is interesting, and hopefully it'll catch on everywhere.
Yeah. And it's funny too, because you mentioned like basically the sins of our past, right? I think at Tampa, like with MacDill Air Force Base, right? They picked like the worst spot to put a military base. It's 90% in the floodplain, almost all of it's wetland. There's 12 endangered birds. There's manatees in the water. I mean, it is a prime spot. They built it in the 40s, and they just didn't have that foresight. So it's really cool to hear how we can kind of adapt and update, really, really cool stuff. It really is.
And I would add on for MacDill, you are 100% right. Okay, they're in the floodplain. That it's a military base. They've had spills over the decades of contaminated soils, etc. But I will say this: they've been doing a really good job over the last couple of decades trying to further improve their habitats.
They have,
and so in doing so, they have because it's CENTCOM right there. They have 1,000-yard buffer around that entire base. No boats can come in, no nothing. So if you go in there, it's so unbelievable, full of fish, and so that coastline. They've been doing a really good job of restoring it. So it's like one of the few places right in the middle of Tampa Bay that's like it used to be, because there's no impacts at all. No fishing, no boating, no nothing. And on the upland side or a transition side, they've been doing a real good job over the years trying to improve it for their own resiliency, but also because they're trying to do the right thing. So McDill, they've really done a good job of making lemonade out of that site. I mean, it is amazing to me.
Oh, 100% agree. Yeah.
I would just say one other thing. We talk about shoreline resiliency and, what is resiliency? I'd like to talk about that for a moment, because resiliency for the shoreline itself is living shorelines. Okay, that's pretty simple. But that's not providing any resilience to the infrastructure or homes or whatever that's above that natural shoreline. So if you want to do resiliency, you do resiliency for your shoreline, which is living shorelines. But now you have to start thinking about sea level rise and more tidal surges and storms. So in your uplands, you can provide resiliency for your infrastructure by just merely raising the sidewalk, or even just an earthen berm that comes up a couple feet if you're going to the 2050 projections of sea level rise. So just putting a living shoreline in by itself doesn't protect your infrastructure. It does protect your shoreline from getting destroyed. So it has to be done in tandem. Living shoreline for that shoreline and for the habitat values. But as you transition into the upland, at some point, you need to go a little higher than your shore is probably. And that needs to be done uniformly. And so that we have a tidal surge of a foot or 2 feet, you're not getting flooded.
Right.
And so that, again, sounds simple, but in some places now you've made yourself a bowl. And so, you're not getting salt water, but you're getting 10 inches of rain and it can't leave, right? Because all the outfall pipes are underwater. So those have to have flapper gates on them. And you may even have to have pumps and generators sitting there to pump your bowl out that you created by doing this. But these are the type of things we're going to have to do if we're not going to do the R word. We're not retreating, right? We're not going to retreat. Then you need to come up with and start thinking about this now. And no one has the money right now to do it like that, right? So they have to start going, okay, we started appropriating money for the next 5 years, and then we're just piece by piece, with uniform fashion, we're going to start doing resiliency for our shorelines and for our infrastructure. Or we're going to abandon certain areas and pull back and move our infrastructure. And that's just the one that gets the most resistance. But in some spots, that is the way to go.
It 100% is. It really is. And because that's the biggest challenge we have, right? Like, people don't want to give up what they already have. It's just a universal truth. And it's one of those things that, that's where we have to start from, right? It's really hard to say, well, that beachfront property you have, well, we're going to make sure that you don't have that anymore. No one's going to buy into that. So you have to have more creative solutions. So I love hearing about that. It's funny, we're a field show, we talk about being out in the field. So we have a little segment we call Field Notes, where we ask our guests about their most memorable field adventures. And you've done a lot of work in the wilds of Florida, and maybe you have a scary moment for us. You want to tell us about that?
Yeah, I will. I mean, because as biologists, we go out where no one usually walks, right? We go out in crappy areas or places that just no one dares go to. So you're kind of on the alert for things that could hurt you, snakes or whatever. But we're also a very urban area, and so we don't see a lot of snakes. And where to be worried to have your snake alert or any other things to be. So I was working on an island where you don't expect many snakes, and it was completely covered with non-natives. I'm literally crawling through the ground trying to get to the water to just check out the shoreline. And of course, I come across a large rattlesnake. I mean, within 2 feet of me. And that's fine. I've come across them and I'm on the ground. And so many times I've come across snakes, and most of them don't do anything or they'll run away from you, right? Well, this one decides it's going to go towards its hole, which is right at my knees. So it comes right at me full speed. And for that moment, it's like, oh my God, this thing is not only not running away, it's coming right for me. I'm going to get struck in the face. Did you know the hole was right there? No, I have no idea that he's going there. I think he's coming, and my face is within striking zone. But he goes immediately right down in that hole. But for that moment there was, it's like, wow, I need to get out of the woods for a while.
Right. No, for that, what must have only been a half second, your entire life was like, this is it. This is the end. This is. Oh my God.
And so, yeah, it's just the hazards or, things you have to watch out for. But that was one that, since the snake did not do its normal thing of just sitting there, or better yet, leaving, it was a very memorable field day.
I bet.
For sure. Oh my God.
Yeah, most people want to know about alligators, and you forget that we also have a
big rattlesnake, not just rattlesnakes, big ones.
And a pretty healthy population of them as well.
Yeah.
So I miss being in Tampa and going to TBAEP. So, as the national level goes, we kind of meet for our board meetings, and, maybe we'll get to meet in person again for conferences. But I loved getting together with TBAEP because not only were they they are a great group of people, but TBAEP always just put on the best events. And I miss going to those and having the opportunity to hang out with you, Tom, there, and other people. So how's it going at TBAEP? How long have you been a member?
I was actually a charter member when they first started, and that was got to be 20 years ago. And they were specifically starting for that chapter at that time because there was a push to have registration for environmental professionals, what we call an environmental professional, or EP, instead of a PE, which is what the engineers get. Yeah. But anyway, that got a lot of resistance by the PEs at that time. And so that's why that chapter was started. And so then it kind of went to a quiet time. They didn't have many meetings. And so it was resurrected again. And now it's really doing well. Like you said, Laura, there's so much participation, a lot of events, and whether it's picking up garbage or plantings or just our monthly educational series that they have. So it is a great local chapter, and I'm proud to be a member. I've been a member of that and the state chapter for many years because of the connectivity and the stuff we learn, right? We all learn little tidbits here and there, and if we're not passing that on, we're doing a disservice for our profession.
Yeah. And I always just love the connections with people. I mean, being able to see people in person, the people you're getting permits from. I mean, that's or your grants, right? Wink, wink. And, it's a great place to just kind of have those off the cuff conversations so that when you do get into the meetings about, well, you have to fill out this form, you can at least have a relationship outside of that where you can talk to each other on a casual level as well. So I think it's great that they're doing so well and you're still doing that. And they're doing in-person events again.
They are. I went to my first one the month before last, and it felt good. Felt good to be back in there. I know we're not out of the woods yet nationally or worldwide on this COVID-19 issue, but a lot more people are vaccinated. As much as you hear, how bad Florida is politically in that realm, it is still, there's enough people vaccinated that if you're vaccinated, you feel comfortable in open air settings and, to get together with people. And I really miss that because it's been a year and a half now, right, of mostly virtual meetings.
Yeah. It's not the same. It really is.
No, it isn't. It's effective, but it's not the same.
Yes.
I agree.
100%.
Right. So anyone listening in the Tampa area, if you're not already a member of TBAEP, you need to look them up.
So Tom, this has been great. It's been really fun to hear a lot about what you do. And we probably could sit here and talk, 5,000, more hours about all the fun stuff that you do. But, we are running out of time. So before we go, is there anything else you'd like to share with us?
Well, the one thing I'll say is remembering back when I came out of college and there was no internships and there really wasn't any easy opportunities for me to get experience or get in any way involved trying to get a job in this field. I'll say it has gotten a lot better through organizations like this, the national, state, and local chapters of the Environmental Professional Group, because those are great places for students, people just coming out of college, or even somebody who just wants to learn about it, whether they want to do this type work. Yeah. I think that gives you great opportunity to network and to, find other ways to volunteer, to put stuff on your resume. So I really think that it's changed for the better since my time coming out of college. And so I highly recommend that to any young professional. Please get involved with your local groups because you don't know where these conversations and these meetings will take you. You may end up getting a great job or at least a lead. And so I highly recommend that.
Yeah. Well, thank you and Bruce Hasbrook and others for starting the TBAEP chapter and seeing the foresight and needing something like that, because here we are 2 decades later, like you said, and it's it's paying off and it's really needed, so imagine how far set back. I mean, Tampa Bay has won awards for their community involvement and, the Regional Planning Council and the ability for people to rally around and collaborate around Tampa Bay. For all the issues of it being challenging in certain places, Tampa's still ahead of the game as far as some of the other similar estuaries around the country. So thank you for you also for, I know that when you look at a map that Tom has touched the restoration locations, it's all over Tampa Bay. So thank you for that work, Tom.
No, thank you. Again, like I said in the beginning, a very fortunate career. And it's one of the reasons starting the nonprofit is to give back, to help do projects on private land, because that's one thing. All the restoration projects on public land, public dollars make sense. But sometimes we're missing the best place to do restoration or the most critical location. And so what we try and do is find where net restoration is needed. And I don't care who owns it. The fish don't care. Let's go ahead and figure out a way to get them funding on private land. If they're willing to put conservation easements on it, and not everybody is, but the ones that do, we're getting projects where there would have never been one. And so I'm very fortunate to continue to do this work, and I'd like to do this for a lot longer.
Yeah, that's awesome.
That is awesome. Yeah.
Well, if there are any private listeners or public landowners or anybody who wants to talk more about Living Shorelines, how can they get in touch with you, Tom?
You can get a hold of me through my email, is probably the easiest, and I'll tell you that. It's TRIES@ESASSOC.com, or through Ecosphere Restoration Institute. You can find us on the web, either one. So thanks for that opportunity.
Awesome. Well, thanks for being here with us today, Tom.
Thank you.
That's our show. Thank you, Tom, for joining us today. It was so great to hear from you. A lot of really, really good information about Living Shorelines. I think everybody learned a lot today. So thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having a good time, Tom.
Yeah.
Can't wait to do it again.
Yeah, absolutely. Please be sure to check us out each and every Friday. Don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review. See you, everybody.